Hey guys, it's Dark Siege, and we have a new Siege commander coming out in December. So we are looking at Steven here, the third, if you will. And I'm looking at his mustache, if I'm being honest here, and he's wearing a cape, and it just makes me think of the 80s of flashers. That Chester the Molester look is what I'm seeing here. And I put that in your head, so ha 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 ha. Okay, um, I'm going to go over his skills. We're going to review. And then I'm going to kind of go in depth of the other commanders and the matchup potentials. And then I'm guessing here that I may catch some of you that are first time siege commanders. And you're thinking like, hey, I'm going to get my first march. What should I do? So I'm going to go into a lot of depth on this one. That way I can do as much informative content as I can. Okay. So skill number one. Skill number one. Uh, Before I start here, I think this guy's. I did in a previous video the other day that I think this cat may be nerfed coming out, like pre-nerfed, because of some of the complaints and that king skill, right? And so my first little clue is it's always been, you know, half the damage from range, full damage at melee, and we don't see that anymore, right? And so let's see what we got here. It's 800 damage from distance and 1500 in melee. And this only goes off on your skill proc. So I think there's some confusion on how a lot of this interacts with each other. And I'll tell you my understanding. And most likely I'm wrong. Okay, so your skill has to proc, which is anywhere between turn 9 and 12, depending on what you're using, right? Your skill procs, and then after that, two things happen. So you proc, next turn, we'll call it turn A, and then turn B. On turn A and turn B, two things happen. One, you do additional damage. The damage is 200 to 350, depending if you're up close or at range. You should be at range if you're doing this correctly, right? And so there's an additional damage of 400 or 700, depending where the distance is, right? And so right when you do your proc, you also inflict the exposed effect. And only in these two turns after the proc do you gain heals on basic attacks. So I don't think it's anytime you get a basic attack. My understanding is you have to proc your skill, and then after your skill is procced, those two turns and only those two turns do you get the healing. Now, the question comes in, what does this exposed effect really mean? Does that mean I am the only one that benefits as far as the healing and the extra damage? Or can somebody else who is a range using the same commander? Now, I just did my proc, and it's the next turn, right? I'm going to start getting this exposed effect. And then the person next to me also has Steven and starts doing range basic attacks. And on their first attack, are they going to get heals because I just procced my skill and they have the exposed effect, right? That's what we don't know yet, right? If that is not able to happen, then I think there's a lot of nonsense in wording that could have been very simplified. But we will see what happens. Sometimes we overcomplicate things when we don't need to. Okay, and that healing is for 2 turns. All right. Skill 2. This is Siege gain 35 defense, and you'll see in a skill later on, I think it gets reduced down to 27.5, but right here you got 30 defense. And while not in combat, I think it's BS, your siege unit also gains 20% march speed. You need the march speed the most when you're getting attacked, right? As you're trying to get away. Often siege are targeted, right? And we just want to get the hell out of certain spots. And so I don't like that. But, if you got something nearby you can pop in and do, God bless you. Okay. The next one is this commander takes 15% less range counterattack damage. If you're doing siege right, the only damage you should be taking is counterattack damage. Do I think this is huge? I don't. Maybe I'm not appreciating what it does, but I don't think it's that big of a deal. Okay, the second part. Whenever your troop launches a ranged basic attack, that's a 10% chance to gain 25% bonus to range normal damage dealt for 3 seconds. 25% bonus if they're doing bonuses like they do armaments. It's a pretty big deal, right? That's a lot of damage. So let's go to the next one. All men must serve. Whenever the commander troop launches a ranged basic attack, there is a 40% chance to gain 2% attack and lose 0.5% defense per turn for 15 turns. That's the way I understand this. And this goes on for like 15 seconds. And when you do it against another stack. My initial thoughts. All right, so the way this works out is altogether you get 30% attack positive and negative 7.5 defense. My initial thoughts on this is I don't like it. I guess we're making things way more complicated, and it sounds, or it seems to me, maybe they're trying to stagger how much damage you can do initially, and then it gains over time. And this is, again, to me, like a nerfy type of skill. Just tell me, I get 25% more attack. You know what I mean? Like, and then give me just a little left defense if that's what you want to do. This whole stack and going on, I just don't think it's necessary. And I think it adds more complication to understanding a lot of these commanders. And that's what you're doing here. And honestly, I don't like it. Okay, the next one. The commander deals, I guess this is the expertise, deals 10% more range skill damage. That's okay. Not a ton, right? I think Margaret does 20% range skill damage. And then in addition to that, there's a 20% chance to deal range direct damage up to 3 enemy troops near the target for 500 and reduces by 15%. And so if my math is right, I believe it's 500 for 1, 850 for 2, and then 1050 for 3. But that's only going to happen when you proc your skill, and then there's only a 20% chance of it happening. So every, let's say at best 9 turns or 10 turns, right? There's a 20% chance every 10 turns that this is going to work. And then when it does, there's a cooldown of 10 seconds, which most likely, if you're running in Horn, you might be able to get it, you'll come under the 10 turns, which means you might miss 2 before you even get a chance to do it again. So not too impressed with this one, if I'm being honest, right? So what's my overall thoughts on this guy? My initial thought is there's an expression, jack of all trades and master of none. That's the feel I get with this guy. And when you look at his skill sets, it's like a mixture of everything. And it gets confusing if you're trying to see, just looking at the math, right, without doing any field test, what works best. And so you want to lean towards the skill damage side because he does skill damage, right? So does that mean he can match up with Gajamata? Well, I think if you did, okay, I look at Gajamata and I look at Margaret and I consider them amplifiers, right? They add damage, a lot of range normal attack damage, right? They increase it a ton. And this cat can do it, but it's only after you proc your skill, and there's only 20% chance of that, right? And so when let's pause for a second here and jump to our commanders. Let's look at first we'll start with Gajamata. When you look at his numbers, right, and you look at the damage attack bonus, right, and the smite factor, you can tell he doesn't do a lot of like ton of DPS off the skill 1, right? That's what makes you know he's an amplifier. And he has march speed bonus. He has 40% health bonus, just period, right? It's not like a 10% chance. It doesn't fluctuate. The dude's a little bit tanky, right? And then he has an attack bonus of 25 for sure, right? And then on the expertise, it bumps up some more. Deals 25% normal range attack. And here you can get some range attack. And so, and you get some heals and all that good jazz. But it's steady. But he's smite. And so smite and this guy, I don't think is the best pairing. If they were paired together, could they do some damage? I think so, but I don't think it'd be the best. I think you're missing the synergy, right? Now let's look at Cordova. Oh, real quick. When you look at the hard stats on this cat, right? When you look at the health and you look at the attack, those numbers are 65 stats, right? 40 health and 25 of the attack. And I'm going to go back to that because it kind of helps me when you look at the stats. You can say, hey, where does this guy fall or doesn't fall to help with other people? Okay, so now let's go to Cordova. When you look at Cordova's numbers, right, altogether hit like a little summary of stats is 30, which he has attack and defense, and then he has 35% damage increase just through other areas, right? And he does the vigilance and he hits by basic attack, then he has that 40% chance to do some real damage. But it has to be a basic attack hitting him, which I think only occurs when you're up on him, right? So he has the AoE, and this is where everybody goes a little crazy and fanatical of, oh, he's the best, siege commander. He's good, but I don't know if he's the best outside of smite, and you would need somebody who can really pair with him to do well. And Margaret does that, right? She crosses the barrier. Does Margaret cross the barrier, or does Gonzo cross the barrier? Right? I guess that's the question, right? Or do they both just have that synergy, right? And so, if I just don't think that the pair between Gonzo here and the new guy Steven is going to be the best match. Yes, he has AoE, but he has some smite restrictions. And I just think those smite restrictions don't make it the best match, right? I don't know how else to say it, right? I'm sure we'll try it in field, and if it's one of those like, oh my god, it just wrecks, then awesome, right? I'll pull back on that. This is just my first impressions, right? Let's look at Bobber. Bobber's tanky, just like Gajamada's tanky, right? And that's why you can pair Bobber and Gajamada in the field, and they do really well, right? They're not pumping out the DPS, but they're tanky and they can survive a long time, right? So he comes in 24. It's skill damage, right? And smite damage has less. Smite damage has less mitigating factors than skill damage. Skill damage gets through skill trees gets mitigated. Attack bonus, defense bonus, right? I have his card here. His stats, like I said, Gajamada was 65. His are 70, man. 15 attack, 15 defense. He also pops out some normal damage bonus of 10%. The enemy does less normal damage. Range normal damage increase, or less on the other guy. 40% more counter damage. Health is 30, attack is 10. He does a little rage buff, right? Like, his numbers are through the roof on being tanky. And this is why he is so good at sustainability in the field. So he's a potential match with Steven. And he helps with the rage. And Steven, in his skill tree, can use rejuvenation. And so that's helpful because you need to get it out there quicker. So they're a potential pair. Do I think they're the best pair? I don't know. And then we have Margaret. I'll be honest, man. Margaret's like one of my faves. Uh, between, I mean, there's only 4 commanders, right? But Gonzo and Margaret, I think I can make an argument that Margaret is just as valuable as Gonzo because she's so versatile, right? If Gonzo isn't the best pair with Steven, then I just think it increases the value of Margaret, if that makes sense. Margaret, her kit, man, she's an amplifier, and she is just pushing up your damage like there's no tomorrow. Look at when they first made the first set, right? It was Margaret and Bobber. Very solid, very strong, and I still believe to this day, I love them, I use them. They pump out good DPS. Then they got a little excited and made Gaja and Gonzo. And they did so well, the community lost their shit and said, oh no, we got to pull back. And now you got Steven. Steven, I think, is that pullback a little bit. We'll get a little bit over there in a second. Okay, so I'll finish this point as I get there in a second. Okay, so attack bonus, march speed bonus, range normal attack bonus, skill damage bonus, march speed reduction on the other side, damage bonus, right? 10% to do defense reduction. And then we're going to add, 10% defense for good measure. And you know what? Do some healing on top of it, right? So Margaret's just hard stat numbers are 30 with 20% skill damage and 5% overall bonus damage. And she has mobility, fast rage, and heal, right? My first thought is Margaret with Steven. That's my first natural selection and pair. When I look at Margaret and Gaja, like I was telling you, they're amplifiers. And I was trying to, and you look at Bobber is a tank who does DPS, and Gonzo is DPS that does AoE, right? A little bit of a glass cannon, right? Not as tough. And then you have Steven. He doesn't fit one or the other. He's kind of that mix. And so if you look at his basic stats, right? Let's go. Well, I'll just tell you what they are. His basic, fundamental, hardcore stats are 35% defense. Now that can get reduced down to 27.5 because of 7.5 on the other side. But then he has 10% skill damage and then 50% reduced counterattack damage, right? That's, 35-ish, and that counterattack counts for something, right? But when he pushes all the way up, right, his 10% chance to get 25% bonus to range no more attack damage, that's like what Gamada does, right? That's powerful if that 10% procs, right? Then you got that skill damage proc, 20% AoE, right? That's powerful, right? But if it procs, then you'll do a lot more damage. Then you have that slow roll, I think it's skill 3, where it eventually gets up to 30% attack and you minus 7.5 defense. Steven just has a lot of variables. And I think in short fights, he doesn't do that well. In long fights, I think he'll kick ass. I think he'll do well. But he's very, random. And he's not as stable. And so I put him not as an amplifier, not as a DPS. I put him as a mix, right? And so I think his best pairing, just off the bat here, I think is Margaret. I think they'll do really well with each other. And I think with Bobber, they would do well too, right? The cool thing with range is they're only taking that counterattack damage. And so I think, honestly, if you really wanted Steven, you can pair him with Margaret, probably do very well. Bobber, probably do very well. With Gonzo, with the AoE, I'm sure there's a ton of value in that. and Stephen just may be like a mini Margaret, right? As far as getting the stuff off pretty quick. I don't see a lot of amplification of damage. There's like 110%, and you lose out on the skill damage, right? So that's what makes me think it's not as good. Um, but he will have rejuvenation, and so that could make up for some stuff. But again, I think he's better matched with the skill tree side. Okay, so I went through that, and so if this is your first siege pair, what are my thoughts? Is he a must-have? Nope, not at all. Not in the slightest. Now, if there's another release of a range commander, then cool, right? Then I would say you could easily just match them out as they came out per season, right? You would have Margaret and Barbara, yay, one pair. You'd have Gonzo and Gajamata as a pair, and then you had Steven and the other guy coming out as a pair. Like super simple, like not complicated. You can mix some stuff up, but that'd be really simple, right? Um, so if you, I've been asked, hey, what march should I use? And because range is so good, I'll tell you this, I'll make it quick. There's been a lot of events, right? So when Margaret first came out, you can get a lot of free heads, not free, but you'd pay for them, right? And so you may have, up to like 60, 70, 80, 100 heads that you have, and then maybe you started her on the daily already. Same with Bobber and same with Garjamata. You have those abilities to get a lot of heads. And if you're a spender and you're doing the dailies, just go with Margaret and Bobber, and you'll kick ass, right? That pair you'll never have to change out if you're just doing like one pair, right? One pair, totally good. If you're doing two pair, does Steven sneak in and take somebody's spot of the four that we already have? I don't think so. If he does, it's incremental at best because I think he's scattered. He has too many variables. Um, so I think if you just keep the four that we have now, three of them are in the dailies, and then you're fine. So if you have the one pair and you do dailies, or you want to know how to invest, you can go Margaret and Bobber. Now, if you're using goal heads and you really want the AoE, you can do it two ways. Margaret with Gonzo, or just Gonzo with Gajamata, and that's fine. You'll be good. I don't think Steven plays a role in this right now that he's a must-have. If you're thinking of getting a siege march and you don't have one already, I think there's a number of negatives, fallbacks, and I just want to give you a couple because I don't want to give the impression that siege is just all awesome and there's no drawbacks. One of them is increased power. If you already have field marches and now you got to carry siege, then you're going to increase your power. And that's a negative because you have to get more kills. Now, if you're already over the 150, then it doesn't matter. Go crazy, right? Do what you got to do. But siege is not a solo march. You can't, I would say that you should have one field march to help you out to be successful. I think it's difficult. There are times when certain KVKs happen when you're on the losing end or the winning end, and there's just so much ton of movement that's really hard to have siege work well for you. It can be done. I know Mr. Siege does it. I'm just saying I've had a couple KVKs where we were on the losing end and we were just stuck on one little area and it was just hard to get, kill points. That's all I'm saying. The setup and breakdown make it real difficult at times. And there's a lot of hate. A lot of people do not like siege. So those are just a couple of the things I would say. And I'm not too sure of the future of siege as far as I don't think they're going to get stronger unless everybody else gets really stronger over time. And that may happen, but there's a real concern, I think, of making Siege more powerful than they are now. If it comes out just him, I don't know if I expertise him off the bat. I'm so low on gold heads because I expertised all of these, all four of these in the last year. And so I am just tapped out on gold heads right now. So if it's just a one commander that's released and it's Steven only, then I'm slowly going to build them up just to save on gold heads because I want to put a couple gold heads and a couple other commanders to protect the city. Because right now, um, we don't have siege outside of just field marches do anything else. I think it'd be really fun if they did, but we don't have that. All right, cats. If you guys made it this far, do me a favor, hit the like button and subscribe. If there's any questions you have, go ahead and write them in and tell me your thoughts on the commanders. I mean, you guys can read like I can and, make some deduction if you think Steven's going to be any good. Range rocks, and hope you have a good one.